right? So thank you, Theo, and welcome everyone to our new next panel of EIF, New Era for European Defence Policy, with EU Commissioner for Defence and Space, Andrius Kubilius, and Camille Grand, Distinguished Policy Fellow at European Council on Foreign Relations, former NATO Assistant Secretary General for Defence Investment. By the way, this is the first public appearance of Commissioner Kubilius, so much thank you for having this possibility. Europe has many challenges. Our challenge in this panel is that we have clock ticking, so let's go straight to the issue. I think we all know the content or context, war in Ukraine, Russia's aggression, Russia's threat, combined with the question of US engagement and involvement in the future in Europe, combined with the quite gloomy global outlook. In that context, Commissioner Kubilius, in your, so the question is how you are going to build this. And interestingly, in your hearing speech, it clearly states that, well, etc., the mission letter tasks me to help Europe prepare itself for the most extreme military contingencies, which means, to prepare for possibility of Russian aggression against EU member states. So very clearly, this is not academic exercise. This is not about European synergies. It's really about the serious issues. So the question, how are you going to do it? What are your 3 priorities which you are going to push forward in this?
Well, first of all, really, thanks a lot. Pleasure again to be with Martin Center and well, as you said, perhaps it's really my first public appearance as a commissioner. But not the first day when I'm thinking about what we need to do. And definitely my mission letter is very clear. This language about readiness for most extreme military contingency comes from my mission letter, which means that, who knows how those mission letters are board. This is opinion of Commission President. So Commission President understands of that, threat, of possibility of military aggression. And that is why we need to be really in preparation of what we call white paper. We need to put very clear language on what we need to do. Now, in my view, there are 3 most important topics which we need to discuss. First of all, Russian aggression will depend very much how we shall succeed to support Ukraine. If we are failing, then this aggression can come even sooner and more aggressive. Second, of course, we need to take care about our own readiness to defend ourselves. And here, if you will read President Niinistö report, you can see the language that our readiness is not on that level which we would like to have. That is why we are expecting that we can, in our synergy with NATO, we can take NATO so-called capability targets, which NATO now is renewing, and which, at least what you can read in international media, that NATO understands how much, those capability targets needs to be raised up. And we need to take those targets in order to have some kind of industry output plan, which would say what we need to produce in nearest future. Because if you look into what different intelligence services are saying, for example, German one, they are predicting that Russia can be ready to test EU or NATO member states with its aggression before 2030. So we have quite a limited time. It's urgency, and of course we have quite a big task what we need to do. And the last point is, of course, everything, all our plans need to be supported with very clear financial plans. How we are going to finance all those needed production and upgrade of our defense capabilities. And here are, again, several things which we need to have in mind. One is, next MFF, but MFF will come only in 2028. Again, very clear language in political guidelines that we have no luxury to wait till 2028. We need to look for additional funds, and quite big ones. There are discussions about 500 billion for next 10 years to be invested into defense. And the last point, of course, is banking sector, starting from European Investment Bank, which till now is not investing into defense. We need to discuss how we can change that.
Excellent. Before we go to more on the, the content, financing, how to get the investment, just a little bit kind of Brussels bubble question, because we have Commissioner Kubilius, then we have Vice President Henna Virkkunen, who will come a little bit later here, and then we have, of course, Kaja Kallas. How is that? Have you kind of figured out how you're going to, because those two actors are also involved, have you figured out how this is going to play out, how you're going to process it? You have kind of Nordic team there?
Well, definitely, first of all, we have some kind of this Nordic-Baltic team.
Yes.
And perhaps, what unites us is really that we know very well what are the threats.
Yes.
Second, of course, being from the same region, at least, I'm always saying that with Estonians, we are very good to exchange, jokes and anecdotes about each other. but we know each other very well, so that is why I don't foresee any kind of, misunderstandings. Yeah. And of course, again, I can repeat, situation, threats, security challenges are of such magnitude that, there is no time for some kind of quarreling between of ourselves.
Okay. Very good. Camille Grand, you have been in this city on these topics already decades. So let's imagine it. Let's imagine that I'm not here. Let's imagine that the audience is not here. It's just two of you. What would be your advice for Commissioner Kubilius on how to move forward from this? Just between us.
First of all, I would congratulate Commissioner Kubilius on the appointment, because I think it's a very powerful signal coming from the European Union to appoint a Commissioner for Defence and Space. And I think it is up to the moment, which is so critical. Maybe my advice, if I may put it this way, or at least my thoughts, would be, first of all, I think it is going to be critical. There's a lot of talk in the defense bubble in town about the white paper that the Commissioner has to prepare in the first 100 days. I think there is an even more pressing issue in the first 100 days, which is what difference can we make in Ukraine now? Not in 1 year, not in 2 years, but now. And I think this is a task for us collectively as Europeans and for the European Union to really reflect on what can make a difference in the coming months in Ukraine. We know the situation is very critical, and we know we have a responsibility, and we need to put our actions where our mouth is. We say this conflict is existential, is critical, has a direct impact on European security. So what can we do to enable the Ukrainians to be in a much better position in this ongoing conflict? Number two, which is a tricky thing, because that's really over time that I think you will have to build this, and I know you're committed to this. It's how to build a relationship of trust with member states that see the European Union, the Commission in particular, a bit as the Americans would put it, the new kid on the block when it comes to defense. They know about NATO. They've seen the EU emerge as a defense player over the last few years and becoming a serious player in many domains, but there is still a question mark. What's the added value? What's the Commission's going to bring to this? So I think there is a need to develop, including a form of a new methodology, to work with the member states to make sure that the priorities are well aligned and defined together, and to make sure also that the level of ambition of the Commission is consistent and well aligned with what we need to do collectively, because of course defense will remain primarily a member state's responsibility. That also has an impact in the relationship to NATO, and I was very pleased to hear the words of a commissioner on the issue of NATO. And then lastly, I think there is a huge challenge for Europe collectively, which is to prepare for the future, for the long-term future. There is an ongoing tech and arms race that is taking place globally. Europe is not super well prepared for that. We have wonderful companies and players in the domain, but by comparison with what's happening in China, the United States, even Russia, sometimes we are lacking behind. And there, I think we have a responsibility, including in a context in which we might have to defend ourselves with less America, meaning that the Europeans need to be more responsible for their own security, which, by the way, is probably the best way to preserve a strong transatlantic link.
Thank you, Camille. There were many, many issues, but let's take one which you mentioned: this famous, EU-NATO relations, and against the backdrop, when Jens Stoltenberg left, he made these comments, a little bit harsh comments about overlapping. So how is this? How do you see this? Because of course, when EU under your leadership starts to build the capabilities and different structures, the risk of overlapping becomes more evident. Or is it really a relevant argument, or how do you see that?
Well, from the very beginning, I understood that this is a question which I need to have a very clear answer, and I can repeat and repeat what I am saying everywhere.
Yeah.
That I do not see any possibility of competition in between of European Union, Commission, and NATO. NATO is really, is very important and very good in developing so-called defense plans. NATO has high military command, and we are not pretending into that area. What EU can do, we can bring added value, helping member states to build their capabilities up to that level which they need to have in order to implement those defense plans. What does it mean we can assist, in building capabilities? It means that we can, look how we can ramp up industrial production and so on and so on, and up to the level that we can, implement what is called NATO capability targets. So NATO is bringing, very clear numbers what EU member states and EU as such, on the European continent, what we need to have. And you will read, for example, perhaps months ago, Die Welt was publishing some article about those new plans. So there are very clear numbers, like there will be a need of additional 49 brigades, NATO is asking. It means, there will be a need of 1,500 additional tanks, new tanks, 1,000 pieces of artillery, several thousand, vehicles, and so on and so on. And my point is very, very clear. We need to ask, first of all, member states and then industry, if we really are preparing ourselves to defend ourselves against possible aggression, and in such a way maybe to deter that aggression. So we need to implement those numbers. How we can do it? It's much better to do it in a collective way. That is where EU can bring exactly this added value, because EU can raise money, what NATO cannot do, and EU can put some additional legal language which would help member states and industries exactly to prepare with those capability targets. So that is our added value, where we can really be helpful for member states, helpful for NATO goals, and that is what we need to do. And I am absolutely sure that we shall be able to do that.
You mentioned, Commissioner, you mentioned many times money. So I think I guess that's the big question. We have various, challenges. The European Union, the transition of economy, sustainable transition, and like today's vote in the French Assembly shows, the budget is the issue. So where is the money? How confident are you that, because as you mentioned, the commitments are huge. Of course, we have now the recent decision on the cohesion funds. I guess that's positive, but how do you see that? How optimistic are you that we get the resources we need?
Well, first of all, what we need to have in mind, of course, preparedness costs money, and quite a lot of money.
Yeah.
But non-preparedness will cost much more. So that is what we need to have in mind. Second, of course, we shall elaborate perhaps some language in our white paper. For time being, it's a little bit too early to say which way we shall go. But if you will look into what experts are discussing, of course, there are several, options. There are talks about possibility to have so-called defense bonds, but this is a sensitive issue, because some countries are saying to borrow with the guarantees of European Union budget is not very much acceptable. That was done during pandemic. Now some countries are much more cautious. I am looking into such a way that I hope that NATO also will come to conclusion next year that there is a need for member states to invest more than they are investing now into defense. If now there is this standard 2%, it can be raised up. Some countries really are investing even now much more, like Nordic, Baltic countries. Some countries are still a little bit behind. But it's very clear that with all threats which we are facing now, member states will need to invest more. The question will be if, in years to come, member states are ready to invest more. We need to look into possibilities how we can front load, those money which they will spend in years to come, to front load them to have investments now. I think that this is also possible. There is possibility also to look, more carefully into is there a possibility to repurpose some of the existing programs where still money are not spent, like RRF or cohesion funds. Now, why not to start to look into possibility to spend those money for defense, which is also very important in general for economical development. If you will look into Draghi report on competitiveness, you will see that Draghi is exactly showing that defense industry and space industry are those industries which can bring a lot of added value in general for competitiveness of the whole economy. And then there is again some possibilities to look into what Prime Minister Letta was speaking in his report, to look into possibility to borrow from European Stability Mechanism, which was again done during pandemic. Still there are possibilities to borrow now for defense. And we need to look into all those possible directions, possible areas, how we can raise those money. But for me, it's very clear that the threats which we are facing now are pushing us not to delay. And again, Commission President recently, when she presented the new Commission, she said very clearly, Russia now is spending for military needs 9%. We are spending 1.9%. And she said, something wrong is that equation. And she said, we have no time to waste. And we need to be ambitious. So that is what I see as that is political, very clear message.
Yeah. Camille, defense investment was your cup of tea still is, but was for many years. So how do you see that? How would you react to what Commissioner Kubilius said?
I think we need to be honest and frank with European citizens. The sort of money that is needed, so being at 2% means that the member states will spend roughly 400 billion a year, probably a little more is needed, and then what comes on top of that from the EU budget or through other financial mechanisms. The question for me is very straightforward. I think we are not quite in a war economy mode. I'm not suggesting we move to a Russian-style war economy that is damaging for the economy, and this is not what we should do. But if we don't do this right now, that we might well end up in a situation where we have to spend much more in 5 years from now. So the whole issue is to do the right thing, to be at the right level of ambition, which is absolutely manageable. It's not a guns versus butter dilemma or welfare versus warfare dilemma. It is the right choice, way below Cold War levels, to make sure that we are safe and secure as a European Union and as Europe, as the whole of Europe.
Very, very clear. Commissioner, how our global partners come in picture? We have United States, who are, on the political level wants Europeans to engage more or invest more on its own defense. I think it's justifiable point of view, but at the same time they want to be very much involved in a commercial aspect of that. And of course, on the other hand, one can say it's very we need American help to build this structure. Then we have others like South Korea. So how the global partners come in picture on this game?
Well, first of all, I'm always again repeating how I see the challenges. I see them in some kind of two time frames. One is, challenges coming from Russia, and those are urgent challenges. As I can repeat again those intelligence reports that before 2030 Russia can be ready, to test us. So we have quite a limited period of time when we need to catch up with capabilities and to invest, from as little as we can do it, quite a big amount of money. But second, challenge, which comes with a longer term, time frame, it's what I call China, rising military power of China, which can force Americans to spend much more of their political attention, defense resources to mitigate this, Chinese rising power.
Yeah.
Which in decades to come can, mean, and we need to be ready for that Americans simply, not because they do not love anymore, Europe, but simply because of Chinese rising power, they will be forced to diminish their presence on the European continent. And this is nothing, what we can change. This is not in our capacity to change. We need to be ready for that. What does it mean? No, now Americans, we are spending around of 350 or maybe coming closer to 400 billion. Americans are spending 900 billion in general for defense. So the question is how much they spend for European security. We need to have very clear understanding. And second, of course, what Camille have said, we need to look also into, from that point of view, that we need to be ready to modernize our defense industry at such a level like Americans are doing or now Chinese are catching up. Because if Americans will start to diminish their presence on the European continent, then all the gaps we shall need to fill up, by ourselves. Now, on industrial development, I see several things which we need to have in mind at the same time. From defense point of view, it's very important to see industrial capacities to produce needed weapons, to keep them, to maintain them and to repair and so on, especially during long-term war. That is some kind of what I call, this is the same defense capability, like, to have weapons in advance, to have military personnel trained, or to have military logistics ready. So from this point of view, our industry, has challenges. It's too fragmented, too weak, and we need to take care about development of our industries. That is why, really, we need to be quite persistent in using our money to raise up our capacities, defense industry capacities. From another side, for time being, we are, for example, not producing number of weapons which are very important. For example, long-distance, precise striking capabilities. We do not have. Or what Camille is always saying about strategic enablers. So, that is why we shall not, till that time when we shall be able to produce them, of course we shall buy that equipment, either from Americans or from other producers, because we are not producing them.
Yeah. Great. We have still a couple of minutes left, but I would like to give floor to Camille to a bit comment on that, because how you think the Americans tried to come in on this discussion.
Maybe two additional thoughts. First of all, in terms of partners, just a word about the United Kingdom,
yes,
which is very much part of the European defense industry ecosystem. If the British government is willing to, I think there is room to deepen that relationship, and I think they are part of the thing, just as Norway already is in the system. Second, on the Americans, I think we need to recognize that the US industry, while it's much larger, is very much focused on the domestic customer, as to serve multiple customers around the world, in the Indo-Pacific, in the Middle East, and so on. So it's not necessarily even able to deliver what we need. So it's not as if there was a gigantic supermarket across the Atlantic where everything was. So we have to make sure that the European industry is in a position to deliver. And then we have to work on what are the urgent needs, what's the best way to meet them, and what are the more longer term needs, and how can we ramp up European industry to meet those demands.
Thank you. Still a couple of questions for Commissioner. First of all, Camille mentioned the white paper, which is, it's going to come on 100 days. Thank you, by the way, also the recognition of Martes and their contribution on that. But what role do you see for that white paper? What is it like a blueprint on your strategy for next 5 years? How do you see the role?
Exactly what I was trying to say at the very beginning. When you asked 3 priorities, I said, I see that white paper exactly developing our policy instruments, policy measures, policy philosophy, based on very clear threat analysis on 3 major topics. Our security and threats of possible war aggression will depend very much on Ukraine. How we are succeeding with our support, military support to Ukraine, how we are succeeding to convince Putin that he will not achieve anything in Ukraine. That should be our message. We need to win this war of narratives. Second, of course, is our preparedness, how we are raising up ourselves up to that so-called NATO capability targets, and the last chapter on financial side. And with a whole clear what I would call, again, philosophical or behavioral message. We cannot allow ourselves to stay on some kind of incrementalism basis. I am saying we need to jump up to what I call Big Bang approach. Because threats, time limits are very, very, very clear. And we need to change our attitude that what we were doing till now is not enough. And we need to rise to those challenges which we are facing.
Thank you. A very final question before leaving the floor to Vice President Henna Virkkunen. Welcome, also part of the Nordic defense team, if I may label. Let's go 5 years from now. The term is coming to end. So what would make you happy? Which kind of European defense union, how it will very briefly look like? What would give the sensation of satisfaction that you made what you wanted to do?
Well, what will make myself happy is that my family in Vilnius, 30 kilometers from Belarus, are living safe, and without war. Which means that we would be able to convince Putin that he is not able to achieve anything. And maybe even that we would be able to achieve that Ukraine is winning the war. And that will bring both sustainable peace on the European continent and a lot of changes, positive changes in the eastern part of the European continent.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Commissioner Kubilius, Camille Grand. Applause. And now for my colleagues. Thank you so much.